Hi readers. In this story set, we are looking at the women's movement and literature within the women's movement. And the focus author for this story set is Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Now, as you've probably seen in other literature that we have read from the 19th century, a big concern during this period of time is social change. We established that we are a nation, and one of the premises on which, the nation is founded is the idea that every man is created equal. Of course, this is a big, conflict and a big question motivating the push for abolition and the abolishment of slavery. But as well, this idea of equality and who is created equal extended to women as well. In the early days of the women's movement, there was an alliance between women's rights activists and abolitionists. As a matter of fact, the suffrage movement began because two women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, wanted to attend an anti-slavery convention and were turned away because they were women. Now, so there was a sort of alliance for a long period of time between these two causes. Now, after the Civil War, this gets complicated, and there are issues within the women's movement in terms of race at the time. There are a number of advocates, but there is still a lot of cultural conflict in terms of these ideas of social progress, particularly after free men were granted the right to vote before women. So this caused, a lot of frustration from some women within the movement. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that, there was divergence of the two causes. However, there was still a lot of common value in seeking equality, seeking rights. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman is born in 1860. So by the time she is publishing, we are post-Civil War. And the 19th century, in addition to the question of race, was also marked by what's called the woman question. So Charles Darwin publishes The Origin of Species, which, if you'll remember, establishes the theory of evolution. And this sparks some to sort of hold fast to the idea of evolutionary purposes for men and women. So throughout history, the traditional role of women, as you're probably aware, was to be caretakers of the home, wives, and mothers, primarily. And men would go work outside the home, be providers, etc., etc. Now the origins of this are an anthropological concern we can't get into, but during this period of time, during the 19th century, the 1800s, you have the development of what's known as the cult of domesticity, or the cult of true womanhood. And this was a set of sincerely held social beliefs about what women should do or should be in order to be true women. And the tenets of this cult of true womanhood were that a woman should be pious, meaning she should be, religious and spiritual. She should be pure, sexually and romantically speaking. She should be submissive to her husband and male authority figures. And she should be domestic. She should care for the home. These were the things that a woman should be. And many women were content with that. However, during this period, you also see a lot of women starting to grow a little bit unfulfilled with their roles. Now, Charlotte Perkins Gilman follows this path that is laid out for women in the 19th century, and that is a path of marriage. So remember, during the time, women's sort of apex purpose was to be a wife and a mother. In order to do that, one has to get married. Now, while women were growing up, they were, of course, sort of the ward of their father. And in, the case they didn't have a father, they would typically live with a male relative, because the socially held belief at the time was that women were intellectually inferior. So this idea of gender inequality, particularly during this period, it's really not an issue of men versus women. The socially held belief at the time was that women's mental capacity was essentially equivalent to children. And this is written about at length. This is not an exaggeration. So men served this role as protector and provider because women, much like children, needed to be protected and provided for. So women would live with their fathers until they got married. And when they get married, then they go to live with their husband, right? And this is often held up for women as this sort of reaching of their free adulthood, if you will. However, this was a sort of paradoxical damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because uh, during the period of time you had laws regarding marriage that were based in a practice known as coverture. And coverture essentially dictates that the rights and assets of a woman are subsumed by her husband in marriage. So women, literally speaking, had less rights as married women than they did as single women. However, socially speaking, in order to be a true woman, you had to be married. So marriage during this period of time, for many women, starts to feel a little bit um, like a little bit like a cage for them, and this was the case in even the best case scenario. Many women at the time were in very, benevolent, happy marriages. However, because of the social structure at the time, there was this sort of growing resentment for the situation that they had been and what their husband would represent within that situation.